Hello, this is State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. Thank you for joining me for a Conversations with Kate. I'm thrilled today to have Katelyn Papadopoulos with me. She's the Executive Director at the Melrose Family YMCA, and we're going to be talking some about her role and what she's been seeing during the pandemic in Melrose, particularly at the Y Academy, which I know a lot of families in Melrose use for their children. And this is an area that's near and dear to my heart as a former 7th grade teacher, an education attorney who also worked at the Executive Office of Education here in the state, coordinating on early education and care programs, and in my role as state representative. But of course, I also have a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, so as a parent, this is a personal area of real passion for me. And so I'm just thrilled that Katelyn is here to talk with us today a little bit about what's going on in Melrose. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is really exciting, and I'm really looking forward to just sharing my experience in childcare with you.
Great. I know you've been in the Melrose community for a while, but I'd love for folks who are listening to hear a little bit about your professional background, because it's really lovely to hear about the trajectory you've taken and how lucky we are to have you here in Melrose. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So childcare has always been a passion of myself. I remember being a kid saying, I want to be a teacher growing up. And I graduated from Salem State University with a degree in early childhood education as well as psychology. And I was so lucky to have an advisor that actually talked to me and advised me on the field of early childhood education, not only in elementary school, but also in the EEC field.
That's great.
Which was phenomenal. So I graduated. I ended up becoming a preschool teacher. A few years later, I got my direct qualification, was the director of the Reading and then also the Saugus YMCA preschool program. And then a few years after that, I said, what's my next step? I love the YMCA. I love childcare. So I joined the Melrose YMCA team as the executive director. But I also have this piece in my portfolio that is the vice president of childcare. So with that, I oversee all of our 9 licensed childcare programs that include early learning and OST.
Okay, and tell everyone what OST stands for.
Yes, thank you.
No
all
problem.
These acronyms, right?
Yeah.
OST is out of school time.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, one thing that's really inspiring about your background is just the career path that you've taken and the fact that there's been such upward trajectory.
Yes.
Something we can talk about in a little bit is about the workforce, and one thing that we've thought about in the policy world is sort of career tracks and ladders and credentialing and how to ensure that people continue to feel challenged in their roles.
Yes.
And so you have, a success story to sort of share about that, which is really great.
I do. And I think the other thing that's so important is, with me being a preschool teacher, with me being a preschool director, I can relate to those in the field, right? And that's where I want to make sure that they are supported by me as well as, everybody else at the YMCA. And it is an exciting story to tell because I have grown. And again, childcare is just such a passion of mine. And
Sure.
I want everybody to know how important childcare is, especially in the early learning programs.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that in terms of what you've seen in your role as a teacher, now as an executive.
Yeah.
Maybe even before we get to the pandemic, just
Sure.
what have been some of the evolution of the childcare field? And then, of course, what are some challenges that you've faced that may have been exacerbated by the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. So when I entered the field, 10 or so years ago, I will say the field was known more as daycare centers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of had this stigma that it was more of a babysitting program where working families dropped off their children, they were able to play with other kids, socialize, and then go home. What I've seen over the past couple of years, specifically at the YMCA as well as other nonprofits and for-profits, is there is a large education piece that comes along with early learning programs, starting from infant through toddler, through preschool into kindergarten. And we have seen that at the YMCA, and that has been a goal over the past 6 or 7 years of mine, is to make sure that we are known as an education program, that we are preparing those kids to enter elementary school. We want them to be successful. Our tagline for the Y Academies is where imagination meets education, and that is so important to me because we want these children who are developing to have that imagination piece, to be able to develop, but we also want to provide them with that education piece. And that's what we do at the Y Academy in Melrose, which is really exciting, yeah.
It sort of is reinforced in the way that our state has structured our government and our agencies. Yeah. So, we're one of the only states in the country that has a state agency specifically dedicated to early education and care. And they also do a lot of the out-of-school time programming licensing as well. Years ago when I was working at a law firm and consulting with different education clients, we worked on a piece that sort of looked at different governance structures. And I was really struck by how singular Massachusetts at that time was.
It is.
And so in that way, it sort of does create this through line, and a really intentional, deliberate one that we've acknowledged sort of as a state, that we've got the early education and care department coordinating with the K-12 department, DESE, and we have a Department of Higher Education as well. This idea that there are all through lines, and we're always sort of transitioning from one phase to the next, but we really want to establish a strong foundation for our kids as they move and grow.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that we absolutely recognize in the field too. And we do think it is a benefit to have our own industry in early childhood education, and working with EEC is very important to us. But with that, as we mentioned, moving into the pandemic, we've definitely seen some challenges because of some of the requirements that do come along with working in an early learning program and operating an early learning program.
Yes, absolutely. And that was an example where some of the, everyone was struggling and racing to stand things up. We were so unknown about the risks. Obviously, we're still learning new things frequently. Yeah. But as you and I were just talking, there have had to be real differences in protocols for younger children as opposed to those in the K-12 school system. Yeah. I shared with you that my 3-year-old was quarantined for the last week. The whole class had to leave because of an exposure. Right. And hopefully everyone is healthy and well like he is, and he's back in the classroom and thrilled to be there. But we were talking about how, for the test and stay program in the K-12 schools, that's probably accomplishable because those children are older, they can physically distance, they can keep their masks on, but in a childcare setting, that's just not feasible. Right. And so I know you also had to deal with sort of ratio requirements that really shifted, that I'm sure were not only hard for your workforce staffing, but also probably the financial bottom line.
Absolutely,
and of course we already knew that, childcare is this interesting dichotomy of so expensive for families. Mm-hmm. I think the average family now I think the average cost of childcare in Massachusetts is higher than the cost of public higher education.
It is. Yes, it is. Yep.
But meanwhile, we also know that, centers aren't flush with resources, that in fact it's, the workforce, the pay structure can be really challenging. And so can you talk a little bit about how the pandemic may have further exposed some of those pain points?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, ratios is something that definitely comes along with early learning program. During the pandemic, our enrollment had to be cut back by at least 25% because of those adjusted ratios, right? We went from 35 square feet per child to 42 square feet per child, and that kind of set the tone of the impact that we had on our early learning programs during the pandemic. Of course, also children unenrolling because of the pandemic, which was very understandable. So we have been building back up, trying to get our programs back to full capacity. The Y Academy Melrose has a license of 168 children, infant, toddler, preschool. So we serve easily over 185, 190 families throughout the year. And right now, because of some of the challenges, as you mentioned, in the workforce, we aren't able to fully enroll our programs, which of course, like you said, causes some financial hardships. And there's so many reasons behind that right now. And we talked a little bit about, what it takes to become a teacher. And I use this example a lot, is you could have a paraprofessional that has worked in a school system for 20 years, and because they don't have a certain coursework, they are not able to be considered a preschool teacher.
Right.
So that's something that, as the state of Massachusetts, it's absolutely being addressed, being worked on. But that is a challenge that we're facing every single day. And with that challenge, we are then not able to fully support our families in our community who need the childcare, who need to get back to work because they're going back into the office. And that's a challenge that we deal with every single day.
It's sort of hard to fathom.
It is.
And to your point, you've got so many different sort of constituents groups that are really impacted by this dynamic, right? You've got people who are working currently under, stressful, sometimes perhaps scary, environments where we've got a very viral disease.
Yes.
And they're putting themselves on the line to support the kids that they care so much about. You've got families who were probably, like some families may not have re-entered the system yet because they're waiting it out a little longer. Others are desperate to find a place to enroll their students and maybe are challenged because you don't have sufficient staff.
Right, exactly.
And you did mention at the beginning, I think you said there are 9 licensed programs. Is that right?
Yep. So we have 9 licensed programs, 5 early learning programs. So within our YMCA of Metro North Association, we serve over 900 children in our licensed program, over 500 in our early learning program. So we're not just seeing this at the Y Academy in Melrose.
Right.
We're seeing this across, seeing this across our entire association, and from our colleagues outside of the YMCA, we're hearing about it as well, that this is a statewide crisis.
Right. And frankly, it's probably a national one, right? Because we see a lot in the news. Our Congresswoman, Katelyn Clark, has been really leading on childcare and leaning into it as a structure that really needs some dynamic support and shifting of maybe the way in which we've been thinking about it for so long. I'm hopeful that we may see some support from the federal government that will allow us to sort of reimagine how we fund some of the child care programs. To your point also, more flexibility perhaps in the workforce expectations. That's definitely something I'm familiar with in the K-12 space. We've created more flexibilities for folks who enter teaching as sort of a second career because they've already gotten a lot of the content work that they would need to accomplish in a different role, right? We also have more flexibilities for teachers who are moving in from out of state for K-12 students.
That's something we face as well. Absolutely.
Right. So there's definitely an important moment in time to be really focusing on this, and I'm glad to see a lot of energy at the state and the national level because people maybe who weren't thinking about it so much before kind of have had to.
Right.
Because you're sort of a foundational piece of everybody getting back to a new normal.
Exactly. And I think another big piece of that, right, is professionalizing our industry, our early learning program industry. I was very, very lucky. I consider myself lucky to have an advisor who understood the early learning programs. But we need to make this industry attractive. It is such a rewarding industry, and we want to make sure that those going into education, that are in college trying to get their associate's or bachelor's degree, understand how rewarding this industry is. And I think professionalizing it will definitely make a big impact and benefit all of our early learning programs. And that comes along with appropriate wages, right? Which we don't necessarily see in the early learning programs.
Right. That's really important to think about.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've talked some about the workforce. I'm also interested on any of your impressions sort of about how kids are doing these days. This has been such a hard time for everyone, but what has it been like from what you've seen, what your teachers have seen in the classroom, and how are families handling it, handling life during a pandemic?
So one thing that we learned is children are resilient. Children are very resilient, which is great. However, during those 12 months, we were not allowed to have any outsiders come into our program. So that includes early intervention specialists that children may have needed, or we saw that it went virtual.
Right.
And we both know that in-person engagement is so important. So we have seen some social emotional effects on the children in our programs, and our teachers have done a phenomenal job trying to fill those gaps. And now as we allow those to come back into our programs, we hope to kind of continue to work up that hill to get over the hill. But we've definitely seen the social emotional impact on children, as well as families. Being a part of an early learning program is being a part of a family. So it's not only getting that education, but it's also getting that social aspects, social relationships, and that's on both ends with children and families, and we saw that impact over the course of the year, definitely.
Yes. Are there any sort of examples that stand out to you in terms of just as someone struggling with something?
Yeah, there's of course, we want to keep it confidential.
Of course.
But there's some children specifically that had early intervention specialists coming in, and they were able to continue it because of the organization did a phenomenal job keeping up with the Zoom calls with their sessions. However, we saw those children regress a little bit. There's no doubt that happened. And again, we're trying to just get them back into the program so we can continue to support those children that may have some challenges. And And the same thing with that relationship piece. We saw families that they use our Y Academy as a place to build relationships, especially those moving to the community of Melrose. That's a great place where they're going to find their network, and that didn't happen. So we couldn't have our family events. That's another important part of our programs, is having family events every month, or kids night out, where the parents can kind of take a little break from life and drop their kids off. And that was all put on hold. So you just think of everything that was put on hold. Of course, it's going to have an impact on the children and families, and our staff too. I didn't mention this, but our staff are true heroes among the YMCA of Metro North. The Melrose Y Academy didn't close their doors. We stayed open for emergency childcare to support all of our essential workers who are doing a phenomenal job and really carrying us through the pandemic. And our teachers were also those essential workers, showing up every single day to make sure that all of our, nurses, paramedics, police officers could go to work and fight the fight that we all did during those 12, 16, 18 months.
Certainly. I'm hopeful that we have had enough time to sort of grapple with these issues to then sort of now be spurred into some action at the state and federal level.
Yeah.
I'm also hopeful for your professionals that, being part of a network that the YMCA provides is sort of a support system that maybe some providers don't have. So you can learn from each other. You can, try different things and sort of be in communication. And obviously the YMCA as an organization is so well resourced, or in terms of connections and your thoughtfulness about sort of the types of supports that you're providing to families and to providers is critical.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the key to the success of our programs is, making sure that everybody understands that they're just not part of that Y Academy community. They're part of the entire YMCA of Metro North, the entire Melrose YMCA community. And as you mentioned, the resources are phenomenal, and we want to make sure that we throw those resources at our childcare programs as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
So next week, I'm doing a panel discussion, a community conversation, including with Kathleen Walsh, the Executive Director for Metro North YMCA.
Yeah.
And, this is sort of a nice way for me to be starting to frame my own thinking on it. But what are some things that you would, as, in your role, or if you're thinking about all of the different teachers and professionals you're supporting, what do you think is important for us to sort of surface in that conversation? And what would you think that you'd like the audience to walk away with in terms of, next steps or action items?
Yeah, I think we mentioned this a little bit, but the professionalizing the field, I think that's so important. I'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts and ideas on that. That I think is a necessary step that we need to take in order to continue to provide our working families with the early learning programs. Without professionalizing the field, we're unfortunately probably going to see a few people leave that childcare workforce and end up going into a different industry, and we don't want to see that. So I would love to hear their ideas.
Okay.
And that, along with that, also comes with, the salary wages for early learning programs. They are educators, they are teachers, and I truly believe that they should be paid fairly. As a YMCA of Metro North, we do our best to make sure that we are at the top of the scale for early learning program wages, but we want to make sure that everybody understands that, because yes, we might be a program within the YMCA, but if all of our other nonprofits and for-profits colleagues need the support as well.
That's really great. Well, I'll definitely be mindful of that interest, and certainly we'll be able to discuss that with the panelists. Yeah. So feel free to tune in.
Absolutely.
And any other remarks or things you want to just leave us with?
No, I just thank you for this opportunity, and also thank you for supporting and advocating for the early learning programs. For me being in the industry, and I'm sure for the teachers and all the other directors out there, knowing that, yourself, along with Congresswoman Clark and Senator Jason Lewis, as well as those on the panelists, are really advocating for us and hear what we're saying, gives me a sense of assurance that we are moving in the right direction. I use the example of where we're climbing up the hill, and I'm hoping we're getting to that top of the hill.
Sure.
And with your support and with everybody else's support, I think we are going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort on everybody's part.
Sounds good. Well, Katelyn, thank you so much for joining me for Conversations with Kate, and thank you for being such an important part of the Melrose community. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.